The first thing that I was really keen to find out when I first loaded up this early access copy of WRC 9 was actually little to do with the game itself, and more to do, funnily enough, with Test Drive Unlimited. And don't worry, I'm not going to linger on this subject for a long time, but it is pertinent to the channel, because I did cover a lot of Test Drive Unlimited 3, or TDU Solar Crown, in other words, news, recently. And of course, it has the same developer, the same producers, Nacon Entertainment. And Nacon, and this is the curious thing, announced that TDU Solar Crown will have the same physics engine as the WRC games, presumably including this one. That interested me a lot, because that could either be a really good thing or a really bad thing. See, if the WRC physics bleed over into Test Drive, that's great, because it will be more realistic, certainly when it comes to stuff like handling the weight of a vehicle. If it bleeds over the other way though, meaning that WRC will feel more like a TDU game, at least in the past of the franchise, that's not so great, because TDU has kind of weird physics, and that comes from somebody who loves the TDU games. I'm happy to say though, it seems to be the former. It is more so that the WRC, more realistic graphics and physics and weight of the car, etc. will probably bleed over to Test Drive, which is the way you'd want it to be. Now, I'm going to talk about the physics first, because I think that along with the graphics, tends to be the two things that people want to know about the most. I don't need to tell you about the graphics, because you can see it on screen. To me, the graphics are perhaps a little bit more grainy than I would have liked. Graininess can be good, sometimes it comes off as what I would call scratchy though, it has a little bit of a dated look to it. I like my grainy graphics to be when it comes to something like a gravel road, rather than the car itself. If the car itself is too grainy and too overly detailed, it can sometimes come off as looking a bit old, and that's the best way I think I can describe it, but you can decide for yourself based on the look of the vehicles. Now, to talk to the physics though, I like some things about it and other things not so much. Now, I'm not going to be comparing this game to Dirt 5, because I simply think it's not a great comparison. Dirt 5, as with 4, 3, 2 and 1, tend to focus in more on the fun side of rally, like Gymkhana and that kind of stuff, whereas Dirt Rally, such as most recently Dirt Rally 2.0, that is a much better comparison to make. Now, previously, of course, on the channel, quite some time ago, I also reviewed V-Rally 4. You could make some comparisons between this game and that one, but I think that it has a lot more in common with Dirt Rally 2.0. But to put it succinctly, I would say that WRC 9 feels like V-Rally 4 and Dirt 2.0 put together. Very much so, in fact. In terms of the physics, it's more like V-Rally. In terms of stuff like menus and layouts and infrastructure and progression though, well then it has much more in common with Dirt 2.0. Now, the thing that I don't like about the physics is actually one thing in particular. And that's not bad, because if there's only one thing that irks you, that's pretty good overall. And one thing that I will say is that in my time with this game compared to Dirt 2.0, I find the consistency to be much better. In fact, the thing that annoys me the most, to be honest, in Dirt 2.0 is the inconsistent physics. Because sometimes it just comes off like the game is cheating. Sudden random tyre blowout or, braking that is just inconsistent. And yes, I know that there are reasons for that and it's technically realistic, but the way the game uses that just doesn't feel random sometimes, it feels pretty deliberate. I didn't feel that in WRC 9, and of course I haven't completed the game, but still, you can tell pretty quickly whether or not it's going to feel like that in comparison to Dirt 2.0. Now, the thing that I didn't like though, because we've got to get into it, is that the cars have this curious little, almost physics parameter, let's call it, where there's a point of no return, and every racing game that's trying to be realistic at least, has this point of no return. And what I mean by that is, when you throw a certain car into a certain corner, either with the e-brake or without it, the car has a certain angle, a drift, let's say, or a controlled slide, and once you go beyond that certain angle, you enter the point of no return. And it's very simple. You've experienced it, chances are, if you played Forza Gran Turismo, any rally game you certainly have, wherein if the car enters too much of an angle, you'll end up spinning around and facing backwards. It's a very simple element of the physics engine. Or at least it comes off as simple. Of course, I didn't develop it, so I can't say that for sure. My point is, though, that in this game, that point of no return is way too shallow. The car begins to go past that point almost instantly. You're halfway through a hairpin turn, either with or without the e-brake being applied, and in anything from a Lancia Delta to a brand new WRC machine or even a WRC Junior, they all do it at roughly the same time. It's like halfway through the corner, the back end will just suddenly be a little bit too far, and the car will end up going backwards. Now that is technically realistic, because there is a point of no return for any car, and some are definitely better than others. A longer wheelbase vehicle with all-wheel drive will typically have a better point of no return in terms of being able to really throw it into a corner than something with a super short wheelbase. So in theory, yes, a short wheelbase, especially rear-wheel drive car, something like a Lancia Stratos, could reach that point of no return real fast and just spin backwards. The problem is, in this game, a Lancia Delta should not be doing that. A Lancia Delta is a stable, high-grip, all-wheel drive hatchback which should not lose control that easily or that quickly, and the same thing applied to multiple different cars that I drove. Now there is one relatively small issue when you really listen to it. The problem is that issue comes up a lot in a rally game, because there are so many tight corners like that where you would traditionally use your e-brake or really throw that car into a corner, and unfortunately there's just something about that biting point wherein you enter the point of no return that comes on way too early. It's like the game is trying to get you to that point too fast. And then, in turn, that issue causes a secondary issue, where because the point of no return occurs too quickly, well then your natural response, especially if you're used to these games, is to counter-steer to correct that. Problem is, when you do that, it does the same thing again, and the car goes the other way instead. And as you can see from some of the footage, the car will begin to kind of fishtail around and become borderline uncontrollable. Now, I'm sure that on a wheel, you could probably adjust the advanced settings and change that around. For me though, as I prefer to be a controller user, it didn't really work that way. It felt a little bit too snatchy for my liking. Now the rest of the physics I enjoyed a lot. And just before those of you who are new to the channel and think how on earth can you review a rally game of any kind when you don't even use a wheel, well, suffice it to say that I have plenty of experience driving fast cars. I've driven multiple millions of pounds worth of fast cars and motorcycles, so I know what I'm talking about when it comes to handling them. In the game though, I just don't find racing wheels realistic, which is why I don't use them. So with that out of the way, let's get back to the point. That particular physics issue is something that will reoccur. If you find it an issue as I did, it will probably annoy you. So I can't lie about that, I can't try and skirt around it, it is something that I notice quite a bit. Now if you don't care about that, or if you get the chance to try the game, maybe you change your settings and solve the issue for yourself, or tune the car perhaps, or use a wheel instead of a controller, whatever the case may be, what about the rest of the game? Well, it was funny actually, because there are two distinct types of menu in this game when it comes to the infrastructure. The first one is the one that they bring you to in career mode, and it's a very Gran Turismo 4-esque or almost old school TOCA game style menu where you've got like this god mode view of everything with R&D, tuning, testing the cars, options menu, calendar, all that kind of stuff, and you can see all the people bustling around. That's cool. I enjoy that kind of attention to detail because it really shows that they put more effort into the game than just the driving. Having a nicely rounded game to me makes it last the test of time and be more of a fan favourite. However, if you go all the way back into the actual menu, where you can go to career mode, quick race, challenges, some of which you can see again in this video, etc., that is almost identical to Dirt Rally 2.0. It has basically the same menu layout, just with different images in the background, which I found very curious. I don't know if they use the same setup even to have that menu, but it's pretty close between the two. Now, in terms of gameplay, progression, incentives, let's call it, why do you want to play? Why should you want to play? What does the game give you in return? That is one way in which I will definitely say WRC 9 gives you more to work toward than Dirt Rally 2.0 does. And the reason why I say that is because, yes, I do prefer the physics of Dirt 2.0. In fact, I like the physics a lot more in that game. However, what I don't like in Dirt 2.0 is how repetitive it is. There aren't a huge amount of different locations, especially without DLC, and I haven't downloaded a single piece of DLC in that game because I'm not buying a game and then paying more just to get stuff that should have been in there for day one. Not for a game like that, at least. So you go into seasons, you enter a career mode event, if you will, you do a couple of rally stages, you win some cash, and then basically you just start the same process over and over again, except each time you do it, the AI becomes more challenging, the career season ends up a little bit longer, and the same thing applies to Rallycross, and Rallycross gets very tedious very quickly. Plus, in Dirt 2.0, at a certain point it just feels to me like you're not really working towards anything. You've got a fully equipped, fully trained team, you've already got the best cars in each category, you're earning money for nothing really, and the career mode just feels like it's for naught really at this point. In this game, even starting out, you can already see that there's more to do. It kind of has this Batman Arkham Knight style menu breakdown of all of these different perks and advantages and skills that you can get, which I like. You can see just from that menu alone, it gives you stuff to work towards. As you could also see in the challenges section, you earn points based on how well you did in the challenges, move on to the next one, very Gran Turismo 4 mission-esque once again, which I enjoyed. And so to me, this game actually does certainly appear to be trying to have some of that nostalgia. To me, this game will certainly appeal more to some of us who grew up in that kind of PS2, WRC and Colin McRae era than it will to somebody who's necessarily brand new to it. If you are a much younger player and you have far less experience, maybe even no experience from the PS2 era of rallying, then I think you might like Dirt 2.0 more than this game. Because it's simpler, it's more streamlined, the physics are a little bit more forgiving, etc. It's just a little bit more friendly in its approach. However, if you come from the 2000s era, I think you'll appreciate more about the structure of the game in WRC 9. The career mode, the way it's laid out, the intent, the attention to detail, the perks, the leveling, the calendar, all of these different kind of unnecessary things that just add more flavour to the game, to me makes it more interesting to somebody who's used to that kind of era of gameplay. In terms of vehicle selection, it's not just WRCs. Again, you could see some of the cars that are featured. You've got a lot of similarity though between this once again and Dirt 2.0. Lancia Fulvia, Stratos, Delta, 037, Ford WRC Focus, the Citroen Zara. There's a lot of crossover, but of course, it's a rally game. So your hands are a little bit more tied than they would be in a Gran Turismo or Forza game, because this game is just focused in on rally. Now, of course, that'll probably change over time with additional content, DLC, etc., but that's down to you whether or not you think it's worth it. My overall verdict on the game is that in terms of physics alone, I prefer Dirt 2.0. For everything else, I like this game more. I think it's a better career structure, far better incentives. It has more of a feeling of being a bigger game that will last longer in terms of, putting your time into it, in other words. So it's a little bit disappointing to me that the physics aren't quite as consistent and not necessarily unrealistic, but that biting point that I mentioned with the handling definitely comes in too soon for my liking. You may be able to change that. If you can change that, then that would pretty much change my whole feeling on the game, in fact. But for now, that's the way it falls for me. For physics, I prefer 2.0. For everything else, I prefer this one. In terms of graphics, I'll be honest, they kind of cancel each other out to me, because this game is a little bit too crisp sometimes, a little bit too scratchy, as I mentioned, but to me, even Dirt 2.0 sometimes has a little bit too much colour and a little bit too much light bloom, which makes it almost look like a vivid dream. I don't really like that kind of look. That's more like a Dirt, Gymkhana style appearance, and I don't like that in a realistic game. So again, it's give and take. They both have advantages over each other. So if that sounds like it'll appeal to you, give it a try, of course, especially if you have Dirt 2.0 already and you can compare it to this. But tell me your thoughts down below if you've played the game already, and of course down the line more of you will have played the game. So tell me down below, do you like it, do you not like it? And of course it's always more beneficial if you can give some solid, well thought out reasons why as well, to benefit other people who might be considering the game. But until next time, I'll see you then. Of course, click here on screen to see my other game reviews. And for now, as always, thanks for watching.